The warning sirens on the bridge of the Bucephalus screamed for 3 hours without stopping. They did not stop because the danger was not going away. The danger was the sky itself. Reality tore open above the realm known as Outworld. It was not a magical portal like the sorcerers of this place used. It was a wound in the universe made by brute force. Thousands of miles of golden metal pushed through the purple clouds. The flagship of the Emperor of Mankind did not float. It dominated. It was so large that its gravity pulled the tides of the acid seas below. On the ground, the 4-armed warrior Goro looked up and felt something he had never felt before. He felt small. The shadow of the ship covered the entire arena where the tournament was meant to begin. The sun was gone. There was only the hull of the ship and the lights of 10,000 gun batteries waking up. Inside the ship, the air smelled of ozone and old incense. A scribe named Malador sat at his station. His fingers bled because he had been typing coordinates for 2 days. He did not stop to wipe the blood away. The data coming from the planet below made no sense. The physics of this world were wrong. People threw fire from their hands without using warp energy. Lizards walked like men. God spoke to mortals. Malador knew only one truth. If it was not human, it was a threat. If it broke the laws of physics, it was a lie. He stamped the paper in front of him. The stamp said, "Compliance." He passed the paper to a servitor. The servitor was half man and half machine. He took the paper and walked away with a heavy limp. Its metal leg sparked with every step. The machine spirit of the ship was angry. The crew was tired. They had crossed a storm that should have killed them all. They were hungry, and their eyes hurt from the strange colors of the warp. Demai. On the surface of the planet, the sorcerer Shang Tsung stood very still. He had prepared his island for the 10th Mortal Kombat tournament. He had gathered the greatest fighters from Earthrealm. He expected a monk named Liu Kang. He expected a movie star named Johnny Cage. He did not expect a city made of gold to fall from the sky. Shang Tsung looked at his master, Shao Kahn. The Emperor of Outworld sat on his throne. Shao Kahn usually laughed at enemies. He was not laughing now. He pointed his hammer at the sky and shouted a challenge. He demanded the new challengers land and fight by the ancient rules. He shouted that the elder gods protected the tournament. The response from the sky was not a champion. It was not a warrior in a GI. It was a lance strike. A beam of pure energy the width of a river shot down from the golden ship. It hit a mountain range to the east of the arena. There was no explosion at first. There was just a flash of white light that hurt the eyes of everyone watching. Then the sound hit. It was a crack that shattered windows in the palace. The mountains simply vanished. They turned to dust and magma in a second. The ground shook so hard that warriors fell over. The message was clear. The newcomers did not care about rules. They did not care about tournaments. They had weapons that could kill planets. The Emperor of Mankind stood on the command deck of his ship. He looked at the view screen. He did not see a tournament. He saw a waste of human genetic stock. He saw a population enslaved by false gods and warp entities. He saw a sorcerer stealing souls that belonged to the golden throne. He adjusted his power claw. The metal hummed with power. He did not want to play a game. He wanted to fix a mistake. He turned to his captain general. He gave a simple order. He told them to prepare the drop pods. He told them to ignore the rules of engagement. There would be no rounds. There would be no fatalities. There would only be total war. The scribes behind him wrote down his words. They would be studied for 1,000 years. The ink on the page was still wet when the first drop pod slammed into the arena floor. The dust rose up. The invasion had begun. The dust from the impact of the drop pods covered Shang Tsung's island in a thick grey blanket. It tasted like ash and crushed stone. The monks who served the sorcerer coughed and covered their faces with their orange robes. They had trained for years to fight in the tournament. They knew kung fu and karate. They knew how to block a punch. They did not know how to block a falling building. The drop pods were not just vehicles. They were weapons. Each one weighed as much as a tank. When they hit the ground, they crushed the ancient stone tiles of the courtyard. The statues of former champions shattered. The garden became a crater. Silence followed the crash. It was a heavy silence. The birds stopped singing. The wind stopped blowing. The only sound was the hissing of cooling metal. Shang Tsung stood on his balcony. His face was pale. He smoothed his long beard with a shaking hand. He had lived for centuries. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had never seen metal fall from the stars like rain. He looked at his champion, Goro. The Shao Kahn prince was huge. He had 4 powerful arms and skin like leather. Goro growled deep in his chest. He wanted to fight. He thought a new challenger had arrived. He stepped forward into the dust. He beat his chest with his upper arms. He roared a challenge that echoed off the walls. He demanded the newcomers show themselves. He demanded they bow to the Emperor of Outworld. The door of the nearest drop pod did not open slowly. It exploded outward. Explosive bolts fired with a sharp crack. The heavy metal ramp slammed onto the ground. Smoke poured out of the dark interior. A figure stepped through the smoke. It was not a man. It was a giant. It stood 8 feet tall. It wore armor made of gold that shone even in the dim light. The armor was covered in eagles and lightning bolts. A red cape hung from its shoulders. This was a custodian. He was one of the Emperor's personal guards. He did not look at Goro. He did not look at Shang Tsung. He looked at the data scrolling across his helmet lens. He was scanning the area for threats. To him, Goro was not a prince. Goro was a Xenos lifeform. Goro was a biological error. Goro did not understand this disrespect. He charged. His feet cracked the ground as he ran. He prepared to smash the golden giant with all 4 fists. The monks cheered. They had seen Goro crush heads like grapes. They expected the golden man to die. The custodian did not get into a fighting stance. He did not shout a battle cry. He simply raised his weapon. It was a guardian spear. It was a long halberd with a gun built into the blade. The custodian moved faster than the eye could follow. It was a blur of gold. He did not block Goro. He stepped inside Goro's reach. The sound was wet and loud. The blade of the guardian spear cut through Goro's bottom right arm. It did not get stuck in the bone. It went through like a knife through water. Goro screamed. It was a sound of shock more than pain. He had never been cut so easily. Before Goro could swing his other arms, the custodian fired the gun on his spear. The bolt shell was the size of a soda can. It hit Goro in the chest. It did not make a small hole. It exploded inside him. The Prince of Shao Kahn fell backward. His chest was a ruin. He tried to breathe, but his lungs were gone. He died looking at the grey sky. He died without landing a single punch. The monks stopped cheering. They stared in horror. The contest was over in 3 seconds. Johnny Cage took off his sunglasses. He rubbed his eyes. He thought someone had put something in his water. He looked at Sonya Blade. She was a soldier. She knew about weapons. Her face was white. She was checking her wrist computer, but it was just static. She looked at the golden giant and then at the dead monster. She knew that kind of firepower did not exist on Earth. She grabbed Johnny by the arm and pulled him behind a pillar. She told him to stay down. She told him this was not a tournament anymore. This was a war zone. Liu Kang stood next to them. The Shaolin monk was calm, but his hands were clenched. He could sense the energy coming from the golden man. It was not chi. It was not a soul. It was cold, hard will. It felt like a machine that hated everything it touched. More drop pods opened. These did not hold golden giants. They held soldiers in yellow power armor. These were the Imperial Fists. They were Space Marines. They moved with heavy, stomping steps. They did not run. They advanced. They held bolters across their chests. They formed a line instantly. They did not need orders. They knew exactly where to stand to create a kill zone. Behind them, ramps lowered, and regular human soldiers marched out. These were the Solar Auxilia. They wore void armor and carried laser rifles. They looked tired. Their uniforms were dirty. They set up heavy tripods and ammo crates. They ignored the bodies of the dead monks. They treated the magical island like a construction site. They were building a fortress. Shang Tsung realized he was losing control. He needed to assert his power. He summoned fire into his hands. He called upon the souls he had stolen. Green skulls swirled around him. He screamed a curse at the invaders. He threw a fireball at the line of Space Marines. The fire roared across the courtyard. It hit the lead Space Marine. The fire washed over the yellow armor. The paint blistered slightly. The Space Marine did not fall. He did not scream. He simply walked through the fire. The ceramic plates of his armor absorbed the heat. He raised his bolter. He aimed at the balcony. Shang Tsung dove for cover just as the wall behind him exploded. Stone chips rained down on his head. He crawled away on his hands and knees. He was trembling. His magic had done nothing. These warriors had no souls he could grab. Their minds were shielded by faith and psycho-indoctrination. He felt like a child throwing pebbles at a tank. He ran toward the throne room. He had to tell Shao Kahn. He had to warn the Emperor of Outworld that a bigger emperor had arrived. On the ground level, the scanning continued. A tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus floated out of a transport. He wore red robes and had metal tentacles coming out of his back. He made a clicking sound as he looked at Kano. Kano was a criminal with a laser eye. He thought he was tough. He walked up to the tech priest. He spat on the ground. He asked her what the metal freak was looking at. The tech priest did not answer with words. He spoke in binary code. He extended a mechatendrite. A metal claw grabbed Kano by the neck. Kano tried to fire his eye laser. The tech priest simply jammed a probe into Kano's cybernetic implant. Kano screamed as his nervous system was overloaded. The tech priest ripped the eye out of Kano's head. He held it up to the light. He examined it. He decided it was primitive junk. He dropped Kano's unconscious body and threw the eye into a recycling bin. The Mechanicus did not care about criminals. They only cared about the purity of the machine. Raiden appeared in a flash of lightning. The God of Thunder stood between the Space Marines and the Earthrealm defenders. He held his staff high. Electricity crackled around his bamboo hat. He looked powerful. He looked divine. He spoke with a voice that sounded like thunder. He commanded the invaders to halt. He claimed this realm was under the protection of the Elder Gods. He said they were violating the sacred rules of mortal combat. A captain of the Imperial Fist stepped forward. His helmet had a skull on the forehead. He looked at Raiden. He did not see a god. The Imperial truth taught that there were no gods. There were only powerful Xenos and warp entities, and all of them were lies. The captain turned on his external speakers. His voice was deep and distorted by the grill of his helmet. He told Raiden that he was in violation of the Imperial Compliance Act. He told Raiden to surrender his weapon and submit to genetic testing. He gave Raiden 10 seconds to comply. Raiden was confused. No mortal had ever spoken to him like that. He was a protector of Earth. He summoned a bolt of lightning and struck the captain. The lightning hit the captain's iron halo. A force field flared into life. The energy was dispersed harmlessly. The captain did not flinch. He did not wait for the 10 seconds to end. He signaled his squad. 10 bolters fired at once. Raiden turned into electricity and teleported away just in time. The spot where he had been standing was chewed up by explosive rounds. Raiden reappeared on a roof looking down. He realized his mistake. These men did not fear gods. They killed them. The invasion spread beyond the arena. The dropships brought heavier equipment. Chimera transport tanks rolled over the delicate bridges of the garden. Their tracks ground the lotus flowers into paste. They knocked over ancient shrines to make room for supply depots. The soldiers of the Solar Auxilia began to dig trenches. They used shovels and pickaxes. They dug straight through the manicured lawns. They filled sandbags with the dirt of the magic island. They set up razor wire. They were turning a place of myth into a place of mud and iron. Sonya Blade managed to get a signal on a different frequency. She tried to call her base. She wanted to call in an airstrike. She wanted the special forces to come and help. But the voice that answered her was not her commander. It was a cold, mechanical voice. It was the ship in orbit. The voice told her that all air traffic was grounded. It told her that the planet was now under martial law. It told her to remain in her designated sector. Sonya realized they had already hacked the satellites. They controlled the communications. Earthrealm was dark. In the dungeons of the island, the prisoner Kitana heard the shaking of the ground. She was the princess of Edenia, but she was Shao Kahn's assassin. She used her steel fans to pry open the door of her cell. The guards had fled. She crept through the hallways. She saw a group of Tarkatans running toward the surface. The Tarkatans were mutants with blades in their arms. They usually loved to kill. Now they were running in fear. Behind them came a squad of Skitari. These were the foot soldiers of the machine god. Their legs were metal. Their eyes were glowing red lenses. They carried rifles that shot radioactive bullets. The Skitari did not run. They marched in perfect unison. They fired with mathematical precision. A Tarkatan jumped from the shadows. The lead Skitari calculated the trajectory. He fired a single shot. The bullet hit the Tarkatan in the skull. The radiation cooked the mutant's brain instantly. The Skitari stepped over the body. They were scanning the walls. They were looking for technology. They ignored the tapestries and the gold. They stopped at a wall panel that controlled the island's traps. One of them plugged a data spike into the panel. The lights in the hallway flickered. The machine spirit of the island was being enslaved. Kitana hid in the shadows. She held her breath. She knew she could not fight these things. They had no emotion to manipulate. They had no throat to cut. They were just weapons that walked. Back on the surface, the initial slaughter was over. The courtyard was secure. The Space Marines established a perimeter. They stood like statues, watching the tree line. The dust began to settle on their yellow armor. The Solar Auxilia soldiers began to distribute rations. They sat on ammo crates and ate grey nutrient paste. They looked tired. One soldier took off his helmet. He was young, but his eyes were old. He looked at the strange architecture of the palace. He asked his sergeant if this was a demon world. The sergeant spat on the ground. He told the boy it didn't matter. If the emperor wanted it, it was theirs. If it was a demon world, they would burn it. If it was a human world, they would bring it into the light. The soldier nodded and went back to eating his paste. It tasted like cardboard, but it kept him alive. Liu Kang and Johnny Cage watched from their hiding spot. Johnny whispered that this was like a movie, but the budget was too high. He tried to make a joke to hide his fear. Liu Kang did not laugh. He was watching the center of the courtyard. Something was happening. The golden giants were forming a circle. They knelt down. A teleport flare lit up the area. It was brighter than the sun. When the light faded, a new figure stood there. He was not the Emperor himself, but he was close. It was Constantin Valdor, the Captain General of the Custodes. He was taller than the others. His armor was more ornate. He held a spear that crackled with blue lightning. He took off his helmet. His face was perfect, like a statue, but hard as stone. He looked at the destruction around him. He did not smile. He did not frown. He looked at the palace where Shao Kahn waited. He activated his voxcaster. His voice was amplified so that it could be heard across the entire island. He declared that this world was now designated as Earth Beta 09. He declared that all false idols were to be destroyed. He declared that all mutants were to be purged. He declared that the imperial truth was the only law. He did not ask for surrender. He demanded compliance. He said that anyone who resisted would be executed. Anyone who harbored a psycho would be executed. Anyone who worshipped a Xenos god would be executed. Shao Kahn stepped out onto the high balcony of his arena. He was huge. He wore a helmet shaped like a skull. He held his wrath hammer. He was used to being the strongest thing in the universe. He looked down at Valdor. Shao Kahn laughed. It was a deep, booming laugh that usually made men wet themselves. He called Valdor a little tin man. He said he would crush him and take his soul. Shao Kahn jumped from the balcony. He fell 5 stories. He landed in the courtyard with a crash that shook the ground. He stood up and pointed his hammer at Valdor. Valdor did not move. He watched the warlord approach. He analyzed Shao Kahn's gait. He analyzed his muscle mass. He analyzed the energy coming from the hammer. He saw the warp energy clinging to Shao Kahn. It was disgusting to him. It was the stench of the corruption that had ruined the galaxy. Valdor spun his spear. The blade hummed. Shao Kahn charged. He swung his hammer. It was a blow that could knock down a castle gate. Valdor sidestepped. He moved with an elegance that defied his size. He thrust his spear forward. The tip hit Shao Kahn's shoulder blade. Sparks flew. The metal of Outworld was strong, but the metal of the Imperium was stronger. The spear tip pierced the armor and drew blood. Shao Kahn roared in surprise. He swung again, faster this time. Valdor parried the blow with the shaft of his spear. The sound was like a bell tolling. The force of the blow drove Valdor's feet into the ground, but he did not buckle. The Space Marines raised their bolters to help, but Valdor held up a hand. He would do this himself. He wanted to test the leader of this enemy faction. He wanted to see if there was any tactical value in their fighting style. He ducked under a swing and kicked Shao Kahn in the knee. The joint popped. Shao Kahn stumbled. Valdor struck him in the face with the butt of his spear. Shao Kahn's helmet cracked. The Emperor of Outworld took a step back. He was bleeding. He was panting. He looked at Valdor with hate, but also with confusion. Why wasn't this man afraid? Why didn't he taunt him? Valdor spoke calmly. He told Shao Kahn that his technique was sloppy. He relied too much on brute strength and magic. He told him he was an amateur. This insult hurt Shao Kahn more than the wound. He screamed and summoned a green energy spear. He threw it at Valdor. Valdor swatted it aside with his gauntlet. The energy dissipated against his armor. Valdor advanced. He did not rush. He walked with purpose. He drove Shao Kahn back. Step by step, the warlord retreated toward his palace. The conqueror was being conquered. Meanwhile, the logistics of the invasion continued. Behind the front lines, the scribes were already working. They set up tables on the crushed stone. They began to catalogue the population. They measured the skulls of the dead monks to check for mutation. They took blood samples from the wounded. They were looking for the gene seed of humanity. They wanted to know if these people were pure enough to serve. A scribe looked at a map of the realms. He saw Earthrealm, Outworld, Netherrealm. He did not see magical dimensions. He saw unstable warp pockets. He marked them for purgation. He stamped a document. The ink was red. It authorized the deployment of the Sisters of Silence. If these realms were full of magic, they needed the women who had no souls to kill it. The sisters arrived in black ships that made no sound. They walked down the ramps in bronze armor. They did not speak. They could not speak. They projected an aura of silence. When they walked past the Earthrealm defenders, Liu Kang fell to his knees. He felt sick. His connection to his spiritual energy was cut. He felt cold and empty. Sonya Blade felt a headache spike behind her eyes. These women were wrong. They felt like holes in the world. The sisters moved toward the palace. They could smell the sorcery of Shang Tsung. They hunted it like wolves hunting a deer. Night began to fall. The sky was lit up by the fires of the burning forests. The Space Marines used flamethrowers to clear the vegetation. They did not want enemies hiding in the bushes. The smell of burning wood mixed with the smell of promethium fuel. The arena was now a base. Searchlights swept the darkness. The tournament was forgotten. The brackets were meaningless. There was no semi-final. There was only the occupation. In the shadows of the palace, Shang Tsung met with Reptile and Baraka. They were terrified. They asked the sorcerer what to do. Shang Tsung looked at his hands. They were shaking. He told them they had to leave. They had to go to the portal. They had to escape to Outworld and gather the armies. This was not a fight they could win with martial arts. They needed numbers. They needed monsters. They needed the power of the Shao Kahn's true legions. They ran through the secret tunnels. They did not know that the tech priests were already mapping the underground. They did not know that a hunter-killer drone was tracking their heat signatures. The drone hovered high above. It relayed the coordinates to an artillery battery. The Earthshaker cannons were parked 5 miles away. The crew received the coordinates. They loaded a shell the size of a man. The officer blew a whistle. The cannon fired. The shell flew through the night air. It whistled as it fell. It hit the ground just as Shang Tsung and his minions exited the tunnel. The explosion threw them into the air. Baraka lost a leg. Reptile was stunned. Shang Tsung used a shield of souls to survive, but he was battered. He dragged himself into the portal. He looked back one last time. He saw the golden ship in the sky. It was glowing. It looked like a second moon. He realized then that the invasion would not stop at the island. They would follow him. They would come to Outworld. They would march on the flesh pits. They would burn the living forest. Shang Tsung felt a tear run down his cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure terror. He fell through the portal, and the purple swirl closed behind him. On the bridge of the Bucephalus, Malador the scribe finished his report. He typed the final sentence. Primary landing zone secured. Indigenous resistance minimal. Hostile leadership retreated. Preparation for planetary compliance initiated. He did not write about the bravery of the monks. He did not write about the shock of the champions. Those things did not matter. Only the result mattered. The clock on the wall ticked. It was time for the next shift. Malador stood up and stretched his back. He went to get his ration pack. The war was just beginning, but for the Imperium, it was just another Tuesday. The crusade marched on. The machinery of death never stopped. And on the surface below, under the cold light of the invasion fleet, the sign that said, "Mortal combat," finally burned down. The logistics of crossing dimensions was a nightmare that no one had prepared for. The scribes called it the Great Bottleneck. The portal that Shang Tsung used was a swirling vortex of purple magic, but it was too small for a tank. The Adeptus Mechanicus did not accept this limitation. They did not understand magic, but they understood structural engineering. They built a massive steel frame around the portal. They drilled anchors into the reality of the island. They used gravitational clamps to force the hole wider. The portal screamed. It sounded like tearing metal. The tech priests ignored the sound. They pumped energy into the frame until the portal was wide enough for a Baneblade super heavy tank to drive through. General Stern of the Cadian 412th Regiment stood by the portal. He chewed on a cigar that had gone out hours ago. He watched his men march into the purple swirl. They looked terrified. They were trained to fight rebels and aliens, not to walk into a different universe. Stern did not give them a speech. He just pointed forward. The first Chimera transport rolled through. The tracks clattered on the steel ramp. Then it vanished into the purple fog. The radio static was deafening. For 10 minutes, no one knew what was on the other side. Then the green light on the console blinked. The bridgehead was secure. The world on the other side was not a world. It was a wound. The sky was a bruised purple color. There was no sun, only a strange ambient light that made shadows stretch in the wrong direction. The ground was dry and cracked, but it wasn't dirt. It felt like dried skin. When the soldiers dug their trenches, the ground bled a black, oily fluid. The air smelled of sulfur and old copper. The gravity was slightly heavier than terror. Every soldier felt like they were carrying an extra 10 pounds. This added up. Fatigue set in within the first hour. The initial expansion into Outworld was slow. The Imperium did not rush. They moved like a glacier. They laid down prefab road tiles because the ground was too uneven for the trucks. They set up void shield generators to create a dome of breathable air. The atmosphere of Outworld was toxic over time. It rotted the lungs. The soldiers had to wear their gas masks constantly. The rubber straps rubbed their skin raw. The lenses fogged up. They could not see the enemy, but they could feel eyes watching them from the jagged peaks in the distance. The first disaster was not military. It was logistical. The water tankers brought from the ships tasted foul within an hour of entering Outworld. The magic of the realm seeped into the plastic containers. The water turned into a thick red sludge. It was not blood, but it was not water. The medics tested it and found it contained high levels of unknown bacteria. The soldiers could not drink it. Thirst became the first enemy. The Departamento Munitorum had to ship in sealed glass bottles of holy water from the Shrine World reserves. It took 3 forms to get 1 bottle. Soldiers began to hoard water. Arguments broke out in the trenches. An officer shot 2 men for stealing a canteen. Morale plummeted before the first shot was fired. To the north of the landing zone lay the living forest. The trees were ancient and gnarled. They had faces in their bark. The faces groaned and wept. The Space Marines of the Imperial Fist looked at the forest and saw a tactical hazard. It was dense cover. It blocked line of sight. It was flammable. Captain Lysander ordered the forest to be burned. He sent 3 Hellhound tanks to the edge of the woods. The tanks fired their Inferno cannons. A stream of liquid fire washed over the trees. Usually, Promethium burns everything. It burns wet jungle and concrete bunkers. But the living forest did not burn like wood. It screamed. The trees shrieked with human voices. The fire seemed to slide off the bark. The sap of the trees boiled and put out the flames. The smoke that rose was black and thick. It formed shapes of skulls and grasping hands. The wind blew the smoke back toward the Imperial lines. The soldiers who breathed it fell to the ground, clawing at their throats. They saw nightmares. they saw their dead ancestors. The attack was called off. The forest was designated as Zone Mortalis. The Imperium built a wall of razor wire and gun turrets facing the trees. They treated the plants like an enemy army. Deep in the wasteland, Shao Kahn watched the invaders through a scrying pool. He saw their tanks and their struggles. He smiled. He knew something they did not. He knew that Outworld was not just land. It was alive. It was his. He did not send his legions to meet them in a line. He sent the land itself. He raised his hands and chanted a spell in a language older than the Imperium. The ground beneath the Imperial staging area began to shake. It started with the sinkholes. In the middle of the supply depot, the ground simply opened up. A crater the width of a city block appeared. Warehouses full of ammunition fell into the darkness. Men screamed as they slid down the steep sides. But the hole did not stop. Giant worms, the sand swimmers of the wasteland, burst from the walls of the pit. They were blind and hungry. They had mouths full of spinning teeth. They swallowed crates and men whole. The sentry guns fired, but the worms were fast. They dragged a lemon rust battle tank under the earth. The tank crew fired their last cannons, but they were buried alive. The supply chain was broken in an instant. General Sturm ordered a counterattack. He sent the basilisk artillery to pound the ground. The Earthshaker shells pummeled the wasteland. They killed the worms, but they also ruined the road network. The heavy trucks could not move. The army was stuck. They were an island of iron in a sea of hostile magic. Then came the Tarkatans. They did not march. They swarmed. They came out of the cracks in the ground. They came from the mountains. There were thousands of them. They were ugly, with teeth like needles and blades of bone growing from their arms. They did not fear death. They ran directly into the machine gun fire. The first wave was cut down. The bodies piled up. The second wave climbed over the bodies. The third wave reached the trenches. Close combat in the trenches was brutal. The Imperial Guardsmen used their bayonets. The Tarkatans used their teeth. A guardsman would stab a Tarkatan, but the mutant would keep moving up the rifle to bite the man's face. The strength of the Tarkatans was unnatural. They could rip a flak jacket open with their bare hands. The discipline of the Cadian regiments held, but only barely. They formed firing lines inside the trenches. Rank after rank fired until their lasgun power packs were empty. The smell of ozone and burning meat was overpowering. Baraka led the assault. He was faster than the others. He jumped over the sandbags and landed in a command bunker. A commissar drew his power sword. He tried to duel the mutant leader. The commissar was a master swordsman, but Baraka was a savage. He caught the power sword between his arm blades. He sparked the metal. He kicked the commissar in the chest, shattering his ribs. Baraka roared and cut the commissar's head off. He held it up for his troops to see. The Tarkatans howled. The fear in the trench line spiked. Just as the line was about to break, the sky turned gold. A teleport strike hit the center of the melee. The Terminators of the Imperial Fists arrived. They were walking tanks. They wore tactical dreadnought armor. They carried storm bolters and power fists. They did not run. They waded into the sea of mutants. A Tarkatan jumped on a Terminator's back and tried to stab the neck joint. The Terminator didn't even turn around. He just backed into a concrete wall and crushed the mutant. The storm bolters roared. The explosive rounds turned the Tarkatans into red mist. The panic subsided. The Space Marines stabilized the front. But the cost was high. Thousands of guardsmen were dead. The ammunition reserves were critically low because of the sinkhole. And the biggest threat was still coming. The Adeptus Mechanicus had deployed a Titan. It was a Warhound Scout Titan named Canis Bellum. It stood 50 feet tall. It had 2 massive plasma blast guns. It walked with a reversed jointed stride, like a giant metal wolf. Its crew, the princeps and the moderati, sat in the head. They were connected to the machine by neural cables. They felt what the Titan felt. They felt the ground under its metal feet. They felt the heat of the reactor. The Titans strode toward Shao Kahn's palace, which was visible on the horizon. It was a simple mission. Walk forward and shoot the big tower. The princeps, a woman named Hecate, felt confident. Her machine was a god of war. Nothing in this primitive world could hurt it. She saw a group of four-armed giants charging, the Shao Kahn. She fired the plasma blast gun. The sun-hot energy turned the Shao Kahn into ash shadows on the ground. She laughed. It was too easy. Then the air grew cold. The sensors on the canis bellum went crazy. The temperature dropped by 60 degrees in a second. Ice formed on the viewports. Frost covered the plasma coils. A figure stood on a rocky outcrop in front of the Titan. It was Sub-Zero. He was just a man. He looked like an ant compared to the war machine. He held a medallion of blue ice. He wasn't casting a spell at the Titan's armor. He was casting it at the Titan's soul. The machine spirit of a Titan is a complex thing. It is like a predatory animal locked in a cage. Sub-Zero sent a spike of absolute zero cold directly into the reactor core's cooling system. But he infused the ice with the souls of his ancestors. The ice didn't just freeze the water, it froze the data. The neural links in Hecate's brain turned to ice. She screamed as her mind was locked into a frozen nightmare. She couldn't send the signal to move the legs. The Titan stopped mid-step. It groaned. The internal heaters failed. The plasma contained in the weapons began to destabilize. The machine was paralyzed. Then Scorpion appeared. He did not walk. He erupted from the ground in a pillar of hellfire beneath the Titan's left leg. He wasn't trying to burn the metal. He was teleporting. He brought something with him. He brought the Netherrealm. Chains made of burning iron shot out of the ground. They wrapped around the Titan's legs. They were spectral chains, anchored in hell. The Titan tried to pull free, its engines whining. The chains pulled tight. The metal of the leg buckled. The giant machine began to tip over. Hecate tried to eject, but the cockpit hatch was frozen shut by Sub-Zero. The Warhound Titan, a god machine of Mars, fell. It hit the ground with a sound like a bomb going off. The impact shattered its void shields. The soldiers of the Imperium watched in horror. They believed the Titans were invincible. To see one tripped and bound by two men was impossible. It broke their view of the universe. The tech priests rushed to save the machine. They drove their repair vehicles toward the crash site, but they were intercepted. Ermac floated down from the sky. He was a collection of 1,000 souls in one body. He lifted his hand. The repair vehicles, heavy tanks made of plasteel, floated into the air. Ermac clenched his fist. The tanks crumpled like paper balls. The crews inside were crushed instantly. Ermac threw the wreckage at the advancing Space Marines. The catastrophe was total. The Imperium had lost its air superiority because of the storms. It had lost its heavy support because of the sinkholes. Now, it had lost its Titan. The advance halted. General Stern realized that his map was useless. The terrain changed when he wasn't looking. The distance between points A and B grew longer if the troops were afraid. The physics of this place ran on emotion, not math. Shao Kahn decided it was time to speak. His voice boomed from the clouds. He did not use a radio. He used magic to vibrate the air in everyone's ears. He mocked the emperor of mankind. He called him a corpse on a chair. He said that their technology was a crutch for the weak. He offered the soldiers a choice. They could join him and gain power, or they could die and serve him as undead slaves. For the first time in centuries, some Imperial soldiers hesitated. They were starving, thirsty, and terrified. The temptation of power was a seed planted in their minds. A platoon of the penal legion, criminals forced to fight, threw down their weapons. They started to walk toward the Outworld lines, begging for mercy. The commissars did not hesitate. The sound of bolt pistols rang out. The deserters were shot in the back, but the damage was done. The unity of the Imperial force was cracked. Night fell again, but it was not dark. The sky glowed with the green energy of the Solnado that Shang Tsung had summoned in the distance. It was a tornado of screaming spirits. It acted like a beacon. It drew the dead. The bodies of the guardsmen who had died in the trenches began to twitch. The necromancy of Quan Chi was at work. The dead eyes opened. They glowed green. The soldiers in the trenches heard scratching from the medical tents. They heard the zippers of body bags opening from the inside. The horror set in. The enemy was not just in front of them. The enemy was their own dead friends. A panic started in the southern sector. Guardsmen fired blindly into the dark. They shot shadows. They shot each other. The discipline that held the Imperial Guard together was based on the idea that death was the end and duty was eternal. But here, death was just a recruitment drive for the enemy. The Space Marines of the Imperial Fists had to act as police. They patrolled the trenches, enforcing calm with brutal efficiency. They smashed the skulls of the rising dead. They burned the bodies. But every Marine used to police the lines was one less Marine on the front. Their strength was being diluted. In the command center, the high-ranking officers argued. The Muggles of the Mechanicus wanted to detonate a nuclear device to clear the area. General Stern argued that the radiation might just feed the mutants. The custodian, Valdor, stood silently. He was analyzing the data. He realized that the enemy was feeding on their fear. The more they panicked, the stronger the magic became. The warp resonance of the area was spiking. If they stayed here, the whole army would be corrupted. Valdor made a cold decision. He ordered a retreat. Not a rout, but a strategic withdrawal to the portal beachhead. They would abandon the heavy equipment that was stuck. They would abandon the supplies. They needed to shrink their perimeter. They needed to build a wall of pure faith and iron that was small enough to defend. The order went out. Exfiltrate to Point Alpha. The retreat was messy. The soldiers had to run while firing backward. The Tarkatans chased them. The living forest extended its roots to trip them. The ground shook. It was a gauntlet of death. One unit, the Kashyyykan Grenadiers, stayed behind to cover the retreat. They were the best of the best. They set up a perimeter around the fallen Titan. They could not save it, so they had to destroy it. They could not let the technology fall into Xenos' hands. The sergeant, a man named Kelling, rigged the Titan's plasma reactor to overload. He knew he wasn't getting out. He watched the horde of mutants approaching. He saw Goro's brother, Kintaro, leading the charge. Kintaro was a tiger-striped monster with 4 arms. Kelling armed the detonator. He looked at his men. They nodded. They were ready. Kelling waited until Kintaro was right on top of the hull. He whispered, "For the Emperor." He pressed the button. The explosion was blinding. A sphere of blue plasma expanded outward. It vaporized the Kashyyykan. It vaporized Kintaro and the first 1,000 Tarkatans. It left a crater that glowed with radiation. The shockwave knocked the pursuing army flat. It bought the Imperium 10 minutes. 10 minutes was enough. The survivors fell back across the steel bridge. They collapsed on the other side of the portal fortifications. They were back on the island, but they had lost. They had entered Outworld with an army and returned with a remnant. They had lost a Titan. They had lost their pride. The mood in the camp was grim. The scribes stopped typing. There was no victory to record. There was only a list of names of the dead. The medical tents were overflowing. The screams of men with magical burns filled the air. These burns didn't heal, they spread. The apothecaries had to amputate limbs to stop the purple rot. On the bridge of the flagship, the Emperor of Mankind looked at the tactical display. He saw the failure. He did not get angry. Anger was a waste of energy. He analyzed the variable. Magic. It was the one variable that defied the imperial truth. He realized that brute force alone would not work. This was not a war of conquest anymore. It was a war of exorcism. He needed to change the rules of the game. He opened a Vox channel to the librarians, the psychic warriors of the Space Marines. He had held them back until now because of the Edict of Nicaea, which limited their use. But necessity overrode law. He authorized the deployment of the Librarius. If the enemy wanted to use magic, he would burn their souls with the fire of the warp. He also authorized the unlocking of the vaults in the bowels of the ship, the vaults that held the weapons from the dark age of technology, weapons that ate reality. The catastrophe had happened. The nose of the Imperium had been bloodied. They had walked into a trap of logic. Now they would have to abandon logic. The war was about to get much darker. The soldiers cleaned their weapons in silence. They knew that the next time they went through that portal, many of them would not come back. They were no longer fighting for territory. They were fighting for their souls. The tactical retreat was a calculated loss. The Imperium of Mankind does not accept defeat. It only accepts a change in variables. The variable that caused the failure was magic. The solution was the Librarius. The edict that banned the use of psychic powers was set aside. The Emperor knew that to fight fire, one must use a hotter fire. To fight the Sorcery of Outworld, he sent the librarians of the Space Marine Legions. They arrived in drop pods painted deep blue. They did not carry guns. They carried force staves and swords that glowed with the light of the mind. Chief Librarian Tigurius of the Ultramarines stepped onto the grey dust of Outworld. The air felt heavy to him. It tasted like old blood. He could feel the screaming souls of the Netherrealm scratching at the walls of reality. He didn't flinch. He focused his mind. He created a bubble of order around him. The purple fog of the realm hissed and pulled away. He was a lighthouse in the dark. Behind him, 50 other librarians marched in silence. Their eyes glowed with blue fire. They were not here to conquer land. They were here to kill the magic itself. The first test came quickly. A group of Brotherhood of Shadows sorcerers stood on a ridge. They were led by Quan Chi. The pale necromancer smiled. He thought these were just more soldiers to trick. He raised his hands. He summoned a wave of green skulls. The skulls screamed and flew toward the Space Marines. Tigurius did not dodge. He slammed his staff into the ground. He spoke a single word of power. A wall of psychic fire erupted. It was not normal fire. It was white and cold. It hit the green skulls and ate them. The skulls vanished. The fire kept going. It hit the sorcerers. They did not burn. They unraveled. Their skin turned to dust. Their bones turned to glass. Quan Chi's smile vanished. He teleported away just as the ground where he stood ceased to exist. The message was sent. The Imperium had brought its own wizards. While the librarians pushed the front line, the office of the Assassinorum made its move. The war had become too messy. The enemy leaders were too strong. They needed to be removed surgically. A single ship, small and black, landed in the mountains. It carried 4 passengers. One of them was a Vindicare assassin. He was a sniper. He never missed. He could wait in one spot for weeks without moving. He did not eat. He did not sleep. His drugs kept him awake. He set up his rifle on a high peak overlooking the path to Shao Kahn's fortress. His scope could see through walls. He was looking for generals. He saw a figure riding a horse made of fire. It was the mercenary Aaron Black. He was leading a convoy of supplies. The Vindicator adjusted his aim. He calculated the wind. He calculated the rotation of the strange planet. He fired. The bullet was a turbo-penetrator round. It flew 3 miles in 2 seconds. It hit Aaron Black in the chest. It went through his armor, through his chest, and through the horse. Aaron Black fell. He was dead before he hit the ground. The convoy stopped in panic. The Vindicator did not fire again. He packed up his rifle. He had a list. That was one name crossed off. But the chain reaction was not just about killing. It was about technology. The Adeptus Mechanicus had been humiliated by the loss of their titan. They were angry. They were logical. But their logic was fueled by hate. They wanted to understand the enemy's machines so they could destroy them. They found a factory in the frozen south of Outworld. It was the headquarters of the Lin Kuei. The Lin Kuei had been a clan of ninjas. Now they were part of the Cyber Initiative. The Grandmaster believed that flesh was weak. He forced his warriors to become robots. Sector and Cyrax were the first. They were red and yellow machines that remembered being men. They stood guard over their assembly lines. They were building an army of cyber ninjas. The tech priests of the Mechanicus approached the factory. They did not attack with guns. They attacked with data. They sent a scrapcode virus into the Lin Kuei network. The virus was a prayer to the machine god. It asked the machines why they had no souls. Sector felt the intrusion. His internal display flashed red. He tried to block the hack. He fired missiles at the approaching Skitarii soldiers. The missiles hit, but the Skitarii kept coming. They did not care about losses. They wanted the factory. A Magos Dominus named Karl led the assault. He was a giant, floating on anti-grav repulsors. He had 20 mechanical arms. He looked at Sector. To call Sector was a crime. He was an abominable intelligence. He was a machine that thought it was a man. This was the worst heresy. Call extended a data spike. He wanted to dissect Sector while he was still awake. Sector charged. He used his flamethrowers. The fire washed over Call's energy shields. Call did not even slow down. He grabbed Sector with a hydraulic claw. He crushed Sector's arm. Metal screeched. Sector fired a teleport beacon, but Call jammed the signal. The tech priests swarmed over the cyber ninja. They used saws and drills. They took him apart piece by piece. They removed his memory core. They wanted to see how he worked. What they found inside Sector's code was a disaster. The Lin Kuei technology was based on ancient Earthrealm magic fused with robotics. When the tech priests plugged it into their own cogitators, the two systems reacted badly. The magic in the code acted like a virus. It infected the Mechanicus datanet. It did not destroy the data. It mutated it. The servitors in the Imperial camp began to scream. Servitors are lobotomized slaves. They have no minds. But the virus gave them false memories. They started to remember lives they never lived. They started to think they were ninjas. A heavy-lifting servitor dropped a crate of ammo and tried to do a karate kick. It fell over and broke its legs. A gun servitor turned its weapon on a tech priest, shouting in a binary language that sounded like ancient Chinese dialects. The logic of the Mechanicus broke down. The machines were going insane. This was the strategic chain reaction. The attempt to study the enemy had poisoned the Imperial supply chain. The tech priests had to shut down their entire network. The guns stopped aiming themselves. The doors wouldn't open. The lights went out. For 6 hours the Imperial army was blind. Shao Kahn saw this opportunity. He ordered a general advance, but he did not send soldiers. He sent the monsters of the flesh pits. The flesh pits were a laboratory where Shang Kahn created mutants. He mixed DNA like a child mixing paint. He created millennia there. He created meat monsters that had no skin. The monsters flooded the Imperial lines. The Space Marines held them back, but it was a wave of meat. The bolters blew the monsters apart, but the pieces kept moving. A hand would crawl across the floor and grab a soldier's ankle. A head would bite even after it was cut off. The horror of the war increased. It was no longer a military campaign. It was a slaughterhouse. In the middle of this chaos, a special team of Space Wolves was deployed. The Space Wolves are hunters. They have senses sharper than other Marines. They can smell fear. They were sent to find the portal to the Nether Realm. The Emperor wanted to close the back door. The team was led by Ragnar Blackmane. He had yellow eyes and sharp teeth. He carried a chainsaw that roared like a beast. They found the portal in a cave of bones, but it was guarded. Scorpion stood there. The spectre of the Shirai Ryu was angry. He had felt the death of his world. He drew his twin swords. He looked at Ragnar. Fire burned in his skull. Ragnar laughed. He liked a challenge. He howled. The Space Wolves charged. The fight was brutal. Scorpion used his spear. He threw it and it pierced the Space Wolf's armor. He shouted, "Get over here," and pulled the Marine into hellfire. The Marine did not die. He stabbed Scorpion in the face with a combat knife. Scorpion's skull cracked, but he just reformed. He was already dead. You cannot kill what is already dead with a knife. Ragnar realized this. He realized that physical weapons were useless. He ordered his rune priest to act. The rune priest was a shaman. He slammed his staff on the ground. He called upon the spirit of Fenris, the ice world. A blizzard exploded in the cave. The hellfire of Scorpion met the supernatural ice of Fenris. The thermal shock cracked the walls of the cave. The portal began to destabilize. Scorpion screamed as he was frozen solid, then shattered, then reformed, then frozen again. He was trapped in a loop of pain. The Space Wolves planted melter bombs on the portal arches. They ran. The explosion collapsed the mountain. The door to hell was closed for now. But the cost of the war was rising. The rations were gone. The soldiers were eating the local fungus, which gave them hallucinations. The water was still bad. Disease was spreading. Nurgle, the chaos god of decay, was watching from the warp. He liked this place. He liked the rotting bodies in the flesh pits. He started to whisper to the wounded. A guardsman with a gangrenous leg heard a voice telling him that the pain could stop. All he had to do was accept the gift. The guardsman ripped off his bandages. His leg was green and pulsating. He smiled. He stood up. He shot his officer. The corruption of chaos had arrived. The commissars were busy. They executed 10 men an hour to stop the spread of the rot faith. The morale was breaking. The Imperium needed a win. They needed to break the spirit of Outworld. The High Lords of the Crusade Council met on the flagship. They looked at the map. They saw the flesh pits. It was the source of the endless mutant infantry. It was a biological hazard. The Fabricator General of Mars made a suggestion. He suggested the use of phosphex. Phosphex is a living fire. It is green and toxic. It burns underwater. It burns in a vacuum. It tracks movement. It is a forbidden weapon, used only in the direst circumstances. The Emperor remained silent on his throne. His silence was consent. The order was given. A bomber wing of Marauder destroyers launched from the carrier. They flew low over the acid seas. They approached the flesh pits. The mutants below looked up. They did not know what was coming. The bay doors opened. Canisters of green gas fell. When they hit the ground, they did not explode. They hissed. Green mist crawled out. It moved like a snake. It found the mutants. When it touched skin, the skin dissolved. The mutants screamed, but the sound died as their throats melted. The Phosphex ate everything. It ate the stone tables. It ate the DNA samples. It ate the air. The cloud grew. It rolled across the plains. It did not stop at the enemy lines. The wind changed. The green death began to drift toward the city of Lei Chen, a village of innocent outworld peasants. The Imperium did not warn them. The cloud swallowed the village. Men, women, and children melted in their beds. The buildings collapsed. Raiden watched this from his sky temple. He fell to his knees. He had seen cruelty before. He had seen Shao Kahn conquer realms, but he had never seen this cold industrial extermination. The Imperium did not want to rule the people. They treated the people like an infection to be sterilized. Raiden realized that his rules of Mortal Kombat were a joke to these invaders. They did not play games. They committed genocide as a tactical maneuver. Raiden made a choice. He could not stay neutral. He could not consult the elder gods. They were silent. He had to act. He gathered his energy. He began to absorb the electricity of the entire planet. The lightning storms in the sky stopped. The static in the air vanished. All of that power flowed into Raiden. His eyes turned pure white. He became a bomb of living energy. He planned to teleport to the golden ship and detonate himself. He would kill the Emperor of mankind, even if it cost him his soul. He vanished in a flash. He appeared on the bridge of the Bucephalus. The Golden Guards, the Custodes, turned instantly, but Raiden was too fast. He raised his hands. Lightning arced towards the Emperor, but the lightning did not hit. A figure stepped out of the shadows behind the throne. She was tall and wore a blank iron mask. She held a greatsword. She was a sister of silence. She had no soul. Magic could not touch her. It could not exist near her. Raiden's lightning simply turned off. It vanished like a candle in a hurricane. Raiden felt his power drain away. He fell to the floor, just a man in a hat. He looked up. The Sister of Silence did not speak. She swung her sword. The flat of the blade hit Raiden in the chest. Ribs cracked. He flew across the room and hit the wall. He tried to stand, but he was dizzy. He looked at the Emperor. The Emperor stood up. He walked down the steps of the throne. He looked at Raiden. He did not look angry. He looked disappointed. The Emperor reached out his mind. He spoke directly into Raiden's brain. The voice was like a mountain falling. "You protect nothing," the Emperor said. "You allow monsters to live because of rules. I bring order. My order is absolute." The Emperor motioned to the Custodes. "Take him. Do not kill him. He is a warp entity bound in flesh. He is a battery. Give him to the Mechanicus. They will use him to power the fleet." Raiden screamed as the golden giants grabbed him. They dragged him away. The god of thunder was gone. He was now just a generator component for the war machine. This was the turning point. The capture of Raiden broke the hope of Earthrealm and Outworld. The defenders saw their god defeated not in battle, but captured like a common criminal. The strategic chain reaction was complete. The Imperium had escalated the violence to a level that Outworld could not match. They had introduced biological warfare. They had introduced psychic annihilation. They had captured a god. But the universe seeks balance. In the deepest pits of the Netherrealm, the former elder god Shinnok woke up. He felt the shift in the balance. He felt the massive death toll. The souls were flooding into his realm faster than he could catch them. This pleased him. The Imperium was doing his work for him. They were killing everything. Shinnok smiled. He decided it was time to join the game. He would not fight the Imperium. He would corrupt it. He would whisper to their leaders. He would offer them the one thing they wanted more than victory: immortality without the golden throne. Back on the surface, The phosphex fire was still burning. It would burn for 100 years. The strategic map had changed. A third of Outworld was now a dead zone. The Imperial army advanced into the ash. They wore heavy radiation suits. They drove tanks sealed against the toxins. They crushed the bones of the dead under their tracks. Captain Lysander of the Imperial Fists looked at the devastation. He felt no pride. He felt only the grim satisfaction of duty. He checked his bolter. He had 12 rounds left. He signaled his squad. They moved forward. The next target was the fortress of Shao Kahn itself. But the fortress had changed. It was covered in green magic and gold metal. The enemies were adapting. They were merging their magic with the scraps of Imperial tech they had scavenged. On the horizon, a new machine walked. It was a cyber demon. It was a massive beast of muscle and gears, built by the frantic alliance of Shao Kahn and the surviving Lin Kuei. It had a bolter mounted on its shoulder and a soul cannon in its chest. It roared. The sound was a mix of a lion and a jet engine. The war had evolved. It was no longer Imperium versus Mortal Kombat. It was a war of hybrids. It was a war of monsters made of science and demons made of metal. The soldiers of the guard tightened their helmet straps. They marched into the green fog, leaving their humanity behind with every step. The only thing that mattered now was survival. And in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. In the grim darkness of Outworld, there is only the same. The chroniclers noted the date. It was the day the sky turned green and the gods died. The day of the phosphex. The war had stopped moving. It had become a wall of meat and iron. On the plains of Outworld, the Imperial Guard dug deep trenches into the ash. They called the place the Grinder. It was raining acid. The rain dissolved the stitching on their uniforms. It turned the ground into grey sludge that sucked the boots off men's feet. There was no glory here. There was only the sound of artillery and the screams of the dying. The phosphex clouds drifted like green ghosts, forcing everyone to wear masks 24 hours a day. The skin beneath the masks grew pale and soft. The small choice that changed everything began with a lack of bullets. Supply lines were cut by the shifting geography of the realm. A company of Blood Angel Space Marines held a crucial ridge called Hill 303. They were surrounded by the Tarkatan hordes. The Tarkatans did not shoot. They just charged, wave after wave. The Blood Angels fired their bolters until the barrels glowed red. Then the clicking started. Empty magazines, dry weapons. Captain Tybalt of the Blood Angels looked at his ammunition counter. It read 0. He looked at his tactical squad. They were using combat knives. They were tired. Space Marines do not get tired easily, but the magic of this world drained their stamina. It made them hungry, not for food, but for violence. The Blood Angels have a genetic flaw. They call it the Red Thirst. It is a desire to drink the blood of enemies. Usually, they control it with prayer and discipline. But Outworld amplified it. The very air of the planet encouraged savagery. Below the ridge, the enemy commander rode forward. It was Raiko. He was a general of Shao Kahn. He wore dark armor and carried a large scythe. He did not order a charge. He raised his hand. The Tarkatan stopped. Silence fell over the battlefield. The rain hissed on the armor. Raiko pointed his scythe at Captain Tybalt. He shouted a challenge. He invoked the ancient rules of mortal combat. He said that if the captain fought him in single combat, the Tarkatans would withdraw for one day. This was the choice. A logical commander would refuse. A logical commander would say that Xenos lie. But Tybalt looked at his men. He saw Brother Claudio holding his intestines in with one hand. He saw Brother Galen using a rock because his knife had snapped. Tybalt knew that if the next wave came, his men would die. He calculated the odds. He was a space marine. He was a demigod of war. Reiko was just a man with a big stick. If Tybalt accepted, he could buy time for the resupply ships to arrive. He could save his brothers. It was a noble choice. It was a choice made from love and duty. It was the wrong choice. Tybalt removed his helmet. The air smelled of sulfur and copper. He stepped down from the ridge. The mud splashed his red greaves. He drew his chainsword. It had no fuel, so the teeth did not spin. It was just a jagged club. Reiko smiled. His eyes glowed with purple sorcery. The two warriors circled each other in the mud between the armies. The first strike was fast. Reiko swung the scythe. Tybalt ducked. The blade sliced the air where his head had been. Tybalt punched Reiko in the stomach. It was a blow that would shatter a tank's armor. Reiko flew backward, but he rolled and stood up. He laughed. The magic of Shao Kahn protected him. He was stronger than a mortal should be. They fought for an hour. It was brutal. Armor was dented. Bones were cracked. Tybalt felt his anger rising. He felt the red thirst scratching at the back of his mind. He wanted to rip Reiko's throat out. He told himself it was for the Emperor. He told himself it was justice. But deep down, he enjoyed it. He liked the pain. He liked the metallic taste in his mouth. Finally, Tybalt saw an opening. Reiko swung wide. Tybalt stepped inside the guard. He drove his chainsword into Reiko's chest. The blade stuck. Tybalt roared. He ripped the sword upward. Reiko was split in two. The blood angel stood over the corpse. He was panting. He was covered in blood. He had won. According to the deal, the Tarkatans should have left, and they did start to back away. But Tybalt did not go back to his lines. He stood there, staring at the blood on his hands. It looked bright. It looked beautiful. The red thirst snapped the final chain of his control. The noble Captain Tybalt died in that moment. A monster took his place. He looked at the retreating Tarkatans. He did not see enemies. He saw prey. He howled. It was a sound that made the blood freeze in the veins of the Imperial guardsmen watching from the trenches. Tybalt charged the retreating army alone. He caught a Tarkatan and tore its head off with his bare hands. He drank from the neck. This action sent a psychic shockwave through his squad on the ridge. The blood angels are connected by their bloodline. When the captain fell, the brothers fell with him. The red thirst took them all. They dropped their guns. They drew their knives. They screamed and charged down the hill. But they did not just attack the enemy. In their blind rage, they attacked anything that moved. A platoon of Cadian shock troopers was advancing to support the Marines. The blood angels hit them from the side. The Cadians screamed, "Friendlies! We are friendlies!" It did not matter. The Space Marines were lost to the black rage. They saw the Cadians as Horus, the arch-traitor. They butchered their own allies. They tore through the Imperial lines like a blender. This was the massive outcome. The unity of the Imperial army was broken. The strategic formation collapsed because the strongest unit turned into a pack of rabid dogs. The panic spread. Soldiers ran from their trenches, terrified not of the enemy, but of the angels of death. High above, in the warp, the Chaos God Khorne looked down. He is the god of blood and war. He had been watching this planet. He liked the tournament. He liked the concept of mortal combat. It was pure. When Tybalt succumbed to the rage, Khorne smiled. He reached out a brass hand. The sky above the battlefield tore open. It did not turn purple like the Outworld portals. It turned the color of a bruised, angry wound. Rain of blood began to fall, not acid, but warm, sticky blood. From the rift, demons began to pour out. Blood letters, red-skinned monsters with flaming swords. They did not care about Shao Kahn. They did not care about the Emperor. They just wanted skulls. The war had been two-sided. Imperium versus Outworld. Now it was three-sided. The demons of Khorne attacked everyone. They attacked the Tarkatans. They attacked the Imperial Guard. They fought the Cyber Lin Kuei. It was total anarchy. In the command center of the flagship, the alarms were screaming. The strategic map was a sea of red warning lights. Constantin Valdor, the Captain General, watched the disaster. He saw the Blood Angels slaughtering the Guard. He knew he had to act. He had to sanction the Space Marines. He ordered the Custodes to deploy. This was a tragic order. The Custodes were the Emperor's bodyguards. They were now being sent to kill the Emperor's sons. The golden ships descended. They landed in the mud. The Custodes charged the berserk Blood Angels. It was a battle of demigods. Guardian spears against chainswords. Brothers killing brothers. The tragedy weakened the psychic shield of the Imperium. The despair fed the Chaos Gods even more. While the ground war collapsed into madness, a second small choice was being made in the engineering deck of the Bucephalus. Tech Priest Omicron 7 was in charge of the Raiden battery. Raiden was strapped into a containment device. Huge cables were plugged into his chest. His eyes were open, burning with white light. He was screaming silently. His energy was being siphoned to power the ship's void shields. Omicron 7 was a logical machine. He saw that the energy output was fluctuating by 4%. This was inefficient. He wanted to stabilize the flow. He analyzed the schematics of the containment unit. He saw a secondary grounding wire. It seemed redundant. If he removed it, the resistance would drop and the flow would be smooth. It was a minor optimization, a tweak of a single cable. He reached out with his mechatendrite. He disconnected the wire. He did not know that the wire was not for electricity. It was for the soul. The wire grounded Raiden's spirit, keeping him in a coma. When the wire was cut, Raiden woke up. He did not break free physically. The clamps were too strong, but his mind was free. Raiden was a god of electricity. He was inside a ship that was entirely electrical. He felt the ship's computer. He felt the engine. He felt the lights. He did not try to blow up the ship. He was too weak for that. Instead, he decided to speak. He projected his voice into the ship's Vox system, but he didn't speak with words. He spoke with the data of the elder gods. He uploaded a vision of truth into the machine spirit of the flagship. The Bucephalus was an ancient ship. Its machine spirit was proud and aggressive. When Raiden touched it, the ship got confused. It started to hallucinate. The lights on the bridge flickered and turned blue. The gravity generators reversed for 3 seconds. Crewmen floated into the air and then slammed back down. Consoles exploded. But the worst effect was on the navigation. The ship lost its lock on reality. The void shields flickered. For 10 seconds the ship was naked against the warp. During those 10 seconds something got in. It wasn't a demon. It was a whisper. The sorcerer Quan Chi had been waiting for this. He was hiding on a moon projecting a spell. He saw the shields drop. He cast a spell of resurrection, but he did not target the dead bodies on the ground. He targeted the trophies. The Imperium keeps trophies, skulls of enemies, armor of defeated kings. In the trophy room of the Bucephalus, the skull of Goro sat on a shelf. The skull of Kintaro. The heads of the monks killed. Quan Chi's spell hit them. On the flagship of the Emperor, the dead trophies began to grow flesh. It was fast and violent. Goro's skull grew bone, then muscle, then skin. He reformed inside the trophy case. The glass shattered. He was naked, confused and furious. He was inside the enemy base. Goro roared. He smashed the door of the trophy room. He ran into the hallway. he found a scribe carrying a stack of paper. Goro grabbed the man and pulled him in half. The alarms changed pitch. Intruders on deck 7. Intruders on deck 8. The Custodes were on the ground fighting the Blood Angels. The ship was undefended. The Emperor was on the bridge, but he was busy holding back the Chaos Gods with his mind. If he stopped focusing, the warp rift would swallow the whole system. He could not move to fight a 4-armed monster. Malador the Sigillite, the Emperor's right hand, grabbed his staff. He was an old man, but he was a powerful psyker. He ran to the hallway to intercept Goro. The Shokan Prince charged. Malador threw a bolt of fire. Goro shrugged it off. His skin was resistant to magic now, hardened by his resurrection. Goro punched Malador. The old man flew back, his ribs broken. It was a disaster. The heart of the Imperium was under attack from the inside. The ground army was destroying itself in a frenzy of blood. The fleet was blind and malfunctioning. In this moment of total chaos, Shao Kahn made his move. He did not attack the army. He attacked the portal. The portal on the island was the only way home for the Imperium. Shao Kahn ordered his shadow priest to destabilize it. They threw solnados at the steel frame. The portal began to collapse. If it closed, the Emperor and his legions would be trapped in Outworld forever. They would run out of air. They would run out of ammo. They would be whittled down until they were nothing. The Emperor saw this. He had to make a choice. He could stay and try to win the war, but risk being trapped. Or he could order a full retreat and save his forces, but admit defeat. The Emperor of mankind does not retreat, but he does reposition. He spoke to the fleet. Initiate the Tellurium Protocol. This was a protocol that had never been used. It was a weapon of last resort. It was not a bomb. It was a gravity weapon. The ships in orbit fired their cyclonic torpedoes. But they did not aim at the enemy. They aimed at the tectonic plates of Outworld. They aimed at the pillars that held the reality of the realm together. The torpedoes hit. The ground fractured. Continents began to slide. The planet of Outworld began to break apart physically. If the Imperium couldn't have it, no one would. The ground beneath the grinder split open. The trenches fell into magma. The Blood Angels and the demons fell together, still fighting as they burned. The fortress of Shao Kahn began to tilt as the mountain under it crumbled. This ended not with a battle, but with the apocalypse of a planet. The small choice of Captain Tybalt to fight a duel had led to the summoning of chaos. The small choice of the tech priest to cut a wire had led to a prison break on the flagship. The cascade of failure forced the Emperor to pull the trigger on the planet itself. The Imperial forces raced for the collapsing portal. It was a desperate run. Tanks drove over friendly soldiers to get to the bridge. Men hung off the sides of Thunderhawk gunships. It was Dunkirk in hell. Shao Kahn stood on his balcony as his world fell apart. He laughed. He was not afraid. He knew that Outworld could survive being broken. It had been merged before, but he had proven something. The Emperor of mankind was not infallible. He could be tricked. He could be made to bleed. As the last Imperial ship vanished through the portal, the steel frame exploded. The connection was cut. The Imperium was gone, but they had left a dying world behind them. The sky was red with the Khorne's rage. The ground was green with phosphex. The air was full of floating continents. The timeline had been shattered. The story was supposed to be a conquest. Now it was a survival horror. The Emperor sat on his throne as the fleet re-entered real space. He was silent. Malador was in the medical bay. Raiden was loose in the ship's computer, a ghost in the machine. Goro was hiding in the ventilation shafts of the flagship, a monster in the dark. The war was technically over. The invasion had failed, but the infection had been brought home. This would not be about the war for Outworld. It would be about the war for the soul of the Imperium. The final convergence was coming, and it would happen on the decks of the Bucephalus. The two universes were now inextricably linked, like two drowning men strangling each other. The portal had closed, but the war was not over. It had just moved inside. The flagship Bucephalus drifted in the black void between stars. It was a city made of gold and iron, 10 miles long, but now it was a dying city. The engines were cold, the plasma reactors were offline, the air recycling plants were failing. The ship smelled of stale sweat and ozone. The crew of 20,000 mortals huddled in the dark. They were terrified. They were not afraid of the vacuum outside. They were afraid of the things that were locked inside with them. In the deepest decks of the ship, near the waste processing plants, the darkness was absolute. This was the domain of the serfs, the slaves who shoveled coal and cleaned filters. They were usually invisible to the lords of the ship. But now they had a new master. Goro, the prince of Shao Kahn, was not dead. He had been resurrected by sorcery and strengthened by the ship's radiation. He sat on a throne made of crushed pipes and skulls. He was huge. His 4 arms twitched with muscle. The serfs bowed to him. They saw him as a god. He was strong. He was not human. He promised them revenge against the officers who whipped them. Goro had found weapons. He had ripped heavy bolters from the automated turrets. He held 2 in his upper hands. In his lower hands he held power axes taken from dead guards. He roared, and the sound travelled up the ventilation shafts. It sounded like the ship itself was growling. Goro's plan was simple. He would climb. He would kill his way up to the bridge. He would take this golden ship and make it the flagship of a new Shao Kahn empire. He led his army of mutants and slaves up the service ladders. They swarmed like rats. They attacked Deck 42. The naval armsmen tried to hold the line with shotguns. Goro smashed through the bulkhead door. He fired the heavy bolters. The explosive shells turned the hallway into a slaughterhouse. The armsmen broke and ran. Goro laughed. This was better than a tournament. This was a hunt. But Goro was the simple threat. The complex threat was in the wars. Raiden was loose in the machine spirit. The god of thunder was now a ghost of data. He moved through the wires of the ship. He saw the history of the Imperium in the databanks. He saw the genocides. He saw the exterminatus of 1,000 worlds. He saw the servitors, men turned into machines. Raiden was horrified. He believed that the Emperor was a demon. He believed it was his duty to purify this vessel. Raiden took control of the life support systems. He did not kill randomly. He targeted the sinners. He shut off the oxygen on Deck 12, where the commissars lived. The political officers clawed at their throats as the air was sucked out. Raiden opened the airlocks on Deck 9, where the torture chambers of the Inquisition were. The torturers were blown out into space. Raiden thought he was being just. He thought he was saving the innocent crew from their cruel masters. To the command crew on the bridge, it looked like the ship was possessed. Doors locked and unlocked by themselves. Gravity reversed in the mess halls, splashing soup on the ceiling. Voices spoke from the voxcasters, quoting ancient Earthrealm proverbs about morality. The Emperor of Mankind sat on the command throne. He did not move. His eyes were closed. He was fighting a war on 3 fronts. With his right hand, he held the psychic beacon that kept the ship from being eaten by demons in the warp. With his left hand, he held the minds of the Space Marines, trying to calm the red thirst that threatened to turn them all into monsters. And with his mind, he hunted Raiden. The Emperor knew he could not destroy Raiden. Raiden was energy. Energy cannot be destroyed, only changed. The Emperor needed a vessel. He needed a trap. He called for the Fabricator General of the Mechanicus. The High Priest of Mars floated in. He was terrified. His machines were not listening to him. The Emperor gave a silent command. He projected a schematic into the priest's brain. It was a design for a containment engine. A Faraday cage made of psychically charged gold. Build it. The Emperor's voice echoed in the priest's mind. Build it around the main reactor. We will not exorcise the ghost. We will harness him. While the trap was being built, the physical war raged in the corridors. Constantin Valdor, the Captain General of the Custodes, led the defense against Goro. Valdor was the greatest warrior of the Imperium. He did not feel fear. He did not feel anger. He checked his guardian spear. The ammunition counter was full. He took 5 of his brothers. They went down into the dark. They met Goro's army on deck 20. The hallway was wide, designed for moving tanks. It was filled with smoke and screaming mutants. The serfs charged with wrenches and pipes. The Custodes did not slow down. They spun their spears. They cut through the mob like a scythe cuts wheat. They did not kill out of malice. They killed because the mob was in the way. Then Goro appeared. He charged out of the smoke. He was a whirlwind of violence. He fired the heavy bolters wildly. The shells exploded against the golden armor of the Custodes. Valdor took a hit to the shoulder. His pauldron cracked. He did not stumble. He sprinted forward. Goro dropped the guns and swung the power axes. "I am the Prince of Pain," he screamed. Valdor did not scream. He thrust his spear. Goro parried with 2 arms and swung with the other 2. The impact sparked white light. Goro was strong, stronger than a space marine. But Valdor was faster. Valdor was a work of art created by the Emperor. He saw the pattern in Goro's attacks. Upper left, lower right, upper right. A pattern, a flaw. Valdor ducked under a swing that would have taken his head off. He sliced upward. The blade of the Guardian Spear cut through Goro's lower left arm. The limb fell to the floor. Goro roared, but he didn't stop. He grabbed Valdor by the neck with his upper hand. He squeezed. Valdor's gorget began to buckle. The alarms in his helmet screamed. Valdor did not panic. He activated the melter charge built into his spear tip. He jammed the spear into Goro's side. He pulled the trigger. A beam of heat hotter than the sun cooked Goro's internal organs. The Shao Kahn prince gasped. His grip loosened. Valdor broke free. He spun and kicked Goro in the knee, shattering the joint. Goro fell. Valdor raised his spear to finish him. But a voice came over the vox. It was the Emperor. "Wait." Valdor froze. The blade was an inch from Goro's throat. "He regenerates," the Emperor said. "He is a biological anomaly. Do not waste him. Take him to the cryocells. The apothecaries will study his gene helix. We will use his DNA to improve the Space Marines." Valdor lowered his spear. He signaled his brothers. They dragged the thrashing, screaming Prince of Shao Kahn away. Goro was not granted the mercy of death. He was destined to become a lab rat. He would be cut apart and put back together for 1,000 years. The rebellion of the lower decks was over. The mutants surrendered when they saw their god fall. Now came the final confrontation. The digital war. The Fabricator General finished the cage. It was a sphere of gold wire and crystal, built around the dead heart of the ship's reactor. The Emperor stood before it. He entered the new sphere. He left his body. His spirit walked into the data network of the ship. It looked like a world of neon light and scrolling numbers. Raiden stood in the center of the engine room code. He looked like a giant made of blue lightning. He held the staff that crackled with binary code. "You are a tyrant," Raiden said. His voice shook the digital walls. Your ship is a monument to suffering. I will drive it into a sun. I will end your crusade." The Emperor appeared as a son of gold. He did not have a face. He was just pure, blinding authority. "You judge what you do not understand," the Emperor spoke. "You see suffering. I see survival. The galaxy is full of wolves. I am the hunter that keeps the fire burning. If I die, humanity dies. Then let it die with honor," Raiden shouted. He threw a bolt of lightning at the Emperor. The Emperor did not block it. He absorbed it. He grew brighter. "Honor is a luxury. Survival is a necessity. You have power, Thunder God, but you lack vision. You are a battery looking for a circuit. I am the circuit." The Emperor expanded. He surrounded Raiden. The golden light swallowed the blue lightning. Raiden tried to fight. He tried to teleport, but the code around him was rewritten. The Emperor used his psychic might to change the definitions of the ship's reality. He defined Raiden not as a user, but as a component. Raiden screamed as his freedom was stripped away. Chains of golden code wrapped around his limbs. He was pulled down. He was pulled into the containment cage in the real world. In the engineering bay, the gold sphere flashed. Inside, the energy of Raiden was trapped. He was no longer a ghost. He was fuel. The tech priest threw the switches. The reactor flared to life, not with plasma, but with the divine electricity of an elder god. The lights on the ship turned on. The gravity stabilized. The air recyclers hummed. Raiden's power flowed through every cable. He was forced to keep the men he hated alive. He was forced to power the guns that would kill Xenos. It was the ultimate prison. He was the heart of the machine he despised. The crisis was stable, but there was one last loose end. The offer. The astro-telepathic choir began to chant. They were the psychers who sent messages through space. Their eyes rolled back. They spoke with one voice. It was a deep, mocking voice. It was Shao Kahn, Emperor of Earthrealm. The voice boomed through the speakers. "I see you. I see your broken ship. I see your corrupted sons. You have survived, but you are wounded. I offer you a mercy." The Emperor sat on his throne. He listened. "Return to Outworld," Shao Kahn said. "Submit to me. I will heal your soldiers. I will teach you the magic to fix your empire. We can rule the galaxy together. Sorcery and science. Join me." It was a logical offer. The Imperium was crumbling. The red thirst was spreading. The resources were gone. A weaker man would have accepted. The Emperor opened his eyes. He pressed the button on his throne that opened the fleet-wide channel. "There is no alliance with the dark," the Emperor said. His voice was tired but hard as diamond. "We do not submit. We do not bargain. We are the Imperium of mankind, and we will come back." He looked at the navigation officer. "Engage the warp drive. Use the new power source." The navigator nodded. He looked at the reactor gauge. It read 200% efficiency. Raiden was screaming in the engine, providing more power than a star. The navigator pulled the lever. The Bucephalus tore a hole in reality. It entered the warp. The journey home would be long. It would take years. In the medical bay, the apothecaries looked at the blood of the Space Marines. The red thirst was permanent. The Mortal Kombat gene was now part of them. They would always be angry. They would always need to kill. The apothecaries did not try to cure it. They wrote a new doctrine. They decided to use it. They would create new chapters. The Flesh Tearers, the World Eaters. They would weaponize the rage. In the stasis lab, Goro floated in a green tank. His eyes were open. He watched the scientists. He waited. He knew that one day the power would fail. One day the glass would crack, and the invasion would begin again from the inside. In the engine room, the tech priest prayed to the spark of the machine. They poured oil on the cage where Raiden burned. They did not know his name. They called him the Omnissiah's lightning. They treated his screams as hymns. The Emperor closed his eyes again. He had conquered nothing. He had lost men, resources, and innocence. But he had gained a god in his engine and a monster in his lab. He had survived. The final log entry of the campaign was written by Malador. He typed with a broken hand. Status: mission failed. Strategic assessment: catastrophic success. We went to conquer a kingdom. We returned with a curse. The timeline has shifted. The galaxy is darker now. The blood is hotter. The machines are crueler. We are no longer just soldiers. We are combatants. And the tournament never ends. Malador closed the book. The ship sailed on into the nightmare, powered by the torture of a god, carrying an army of berserkers led by a man who had forgotten how to smile. The conquest was over. The eternal war had just begun. 500 years have passed since the fleet returned from the rift. The records of the campaign were burned. The scribes who wrote them were mind-wiped or executed. The official history says that the Bucephalus suffered a catastrophic warp drive malfunction that stranded it in deep space for a decade. The official history lies. The truth is hidden in the deep vaults of the Imperial Palace, locked behind blast doors that require 3 genetic keys to open. I am Inquisitor Kolsch, and I am one of the few who knows the truth. I am recording this audio log before I die, so that my successor understands why the galaxy feels different. The Imperium survived the contact with Outworld, but it did not leave unchanged. We brought the infection home with us. It is not a viral infection. It is a cultural one. The logic of Shao Kahn has seeped into the logic of the High Lords of Terror. We used to fight for survival. Now, we fight for sport. The arenas of the Hive worlds have changed. They no longer host simple gladiatorial games. They host combat. It is a ritual. 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. The winner gets rations. The loser gets his skull added to the wall. The populace cheers for blood in a way they never did before. They are feeding something. I suspect they are feeding the Red God who watched us in that other realm. The Adeptus Mechanicus has changed the most. They treat the flagship Bucephalus as a holy temple. They do not let anyone near the engineering deck. I have seen the reports. They say the engine screams. They say the machine spirit is angry and demands prayer every hour. We know it is not a machine spirit. It is the entity Raiden, bound in gold and wire, burning eternally to push our ships faster. The new thunder pattern drives are efficient, but the crews who work them go mad. They dream of a man in a bamboo hat telling them to break their chains. The tech priests lobotomize them to keep the secret. And then there are the Astartes, the Space Marines. The gene seed of the chapters that fought in the grinder has mutated. The apothecaries call it the Outworld Helix. It makes the Marines stronger. Their skin is harder. Some of them grow bone spurs on their elbows, but they are also angrier. The chaplains have to invent new rituals to keep them calm. They built fighting pits on their battle barges. They force the brothers to duel until first blood to drain the rage. They call it the Tournament of Sorrow. It is a shame to see the Emperor's angels reduced to pit fighters, but it is the only way to keep them from turning on us. Deep in the biological labs of Mars, there is a stasis pod, labeled Specimen 0. Inside is the 4-armed Xenos. He's still alive. He's frozen in time. The biologists harvest his DNA every 10 years. They are trying to create a new breed of heavy-lifting servitors. They want slaves with 4 arms to load artillery shells. It is an abomination. Every time they cut him, he heals. Every time he heals, the psyker sensors spike. He is waiting. I fear the day the power fails on Mars. He will not be just a beast. He will be a general. The Emperor sits on the golden throne. He is silent. But the astropaths say his dreams have changed. He no longer dreams only of the warp. He dreams of green fire. He dreams of a tower made of skulls. He knows that the door we closed is not locked. It is just shut. The enemy is still there. Shao Kahn is still there. And he has had 500 years to study the technology we left behind. We left tanks. We left armor. We left the dead bodies of space marines. He is learning. He is adapting. The campaign was a mistake. We tried to conquer a realm that runs on nightmare logic with guns and bureaucracy. We failed. We thought we escaped, but we just expanded the arena. The galaxy is now one giant fighting pit. The mercy of a quick death is gone. Now there are only fatalities. This is the end of the recording. Prepare the next generation. Tell them to guard the rift. Tell them that if the sky ever turns purple, they should not fight. They should run, but I know they won't. They are Imperial. They will fight, and the blood will flow, and the laughter of the dark gods will never stop.